r/no sleep. User, the cold people. My romantic cabin getaway with my fiancée isn't exactly going as planned. My fiancée and I are from California, but her family lives in Colorado, and they own a cabin near Pikes Peak, way up in the mountains. After visiting them, they recommended we go stay at the cabin a few days. We are avid hikers and jumped at the opportunity. Colorado is very rich in Native American folk legend. Virtually every place you go used to belong to an indigenous community, and the few of them who remain keep the traditions and stories alive. Pikes Peak is no different. There are enough stories to give anybody the sense that the land itself is alive. I don't know if this has anything to do with what is happening, but maybe someone here is from Colorado and could help us connect the dots. Faye and I are currently at the cabin. It's day 4, and we were planning on leaving today, but things have gotten very strange around here, and it looks like we're going to be here a while longer. We have enough food for a winter and the heater is in stellar order, but the Wi-Fi is terrible at best, and there is virtually no cell reception. We feel isolated. I will try to respond to comments, but the internet dips out for hours at a time up here. The first weird thing that happened was the snow. There was no snow in the forecast, so we packed light. But on first night here, fussed our luck, a blizzard pounded the whole area. My little Corolla is basically a brick of ice outside. And there's no way I'm going to try to make the 6-mile drive down the mountain to the town. I blame myself for trusting Colorado in spring. After a day of lovely hiking and sightseeing, some really unsettling stuff started happening. When we returned to the cabin just before dusk, we found an enormous dreamcatcher dangling from a tree about a dozen yards from the back door. This wasn't the kind you're imagining, the kind you buy from a novelty shop. This thing was made from twigs and twine, and it's about 3 feet in diameter. Absolutely humongous. Neither Faye nor I were stupid enough to touch it. We're veteran horror movie fans, and we know that's how you get cursed. If the snow melts a bit, get back out there and snap a picture of it and post it here. That night, while we were eating dinner, we heard a bunch of noises in the woods outside. Twigs crunching, leaves rustling, etc. This isn't unusual because we saw some elk and deer on our hike, but the sounds were slow and purposeful. They stopped and started and were rhythmic, like someone was casing the area in a crescent shape around the cabin. I used my really bright tactical flashlight to look outside from the porch, but there was nothing. We stayed in all day on Friday, and just cuddled or hung out or played some of the board games we brought and some of the Super Nintendo games they had in the cabin. Donkey Kong Country 2. I have considered stealing because it's the greatest game ever made. It snowed again, and after dark, we started hearing more noises. Around 1 a.m., Faye woke me up and told me she was hearing a voice outside. I strained to listen, and one thought could make out the sound of a man crying very far away. But his voice was drowned out by the wind, so one wasn't absolutely certain of what I heard. We went back to sleep, but again around 4:45 a.m., we heard him more distinctly and closer. He sounded like he was calling for help, but he would dip into another language that I've never heard before. We called the ranger station at the bottom of the hill using my cell phone, and they told us they'd get up there and check it out. We never saw them, and I doubt they ever came. On Saturday, shit got really scary. It snowed again in the morning, and I stopped getting service for most of the day. Faye and I watched movies and tried to Skype with her family, but that didn't work. She went to sleep early, around 8, while I did some photo editing on my laptop in the living room. She woke up crying hysterically. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she'd had a dream that she was lost in the woods outside, and something was following her. I cuddled with her until she fell back asleep, and eventually, drifted off too. Faye woke me up around 1 a.m. She was absolutely beside herself. I've never seen her so afraid in my life, and just the look on her face really unsettled me. She told me that she heard the man outside again, but she recognized the voice. She was absolutely convinced that it was her grandfather's voice, and that he was wandering around outside, begging for help. Faye's grandpa died when we were seniors in college 4 years ago. I told her that she was dreaming, but then I heard the voice too. I never met the guy so wouldn't recognize his voice, but it did sound different from the night before. It sounded older. I had to do everything I could to keep her from running off into the woods looking for him. Eventually, she realized that the possibility of it being him was absurd, so we put a movie on at a good volume and fell back asleep. My cell phone wouldn't connect a single call. What happened last night, Sunday, was the thing that has sent me over the edge. Essentially, the same thing happened, around 1 a.m., at which point I was still awake, almost expecting the noise to happen. I heard a voice. This time, it was a woman's. Thankfully, it was distant enough that it didn't wake Faye. I walked into the bathroom and cracked the window open just a tiny bit. The frosty air that came through that crack seemed like a death sentence to me as a Californian. Nobody could survive outside for long in that, not without serious military-grade winter gear. And yet, someone was wandering the fuck around out there, stepping on twigs and crying. I am a reasonable, skeptical, sometimes arrogant agnost. But I'm telling you, the voice sounded exactly like my mother's. My mom is alive and well and living in Southern California, so my brain instantly cramped at the sound of her voice out near in the Rocky Mountains. I would know my mother's voice anywhere. I think we all would, and I'm telling you, I'm about 90% sure it was hers, which is way too sure to not scare the shit out of me. I grabbed my light and went outside with a blanket wrapped around me and my hiking boots on. I circled the entire cabin and looked around. There was snow pushed out of the way in a big, meandering pattern that snaked in and out of the tree line. Someone was drunkenly shuffling around. Maybe they were injured. The path went right up to the bathroom window and then back into the woods. Each time the voice called out, I shouted, "Mom," or "Who's there?" or "Who are you?" And each time, the voice receded further into the woods. I'm pretty certain it was trying to coax me deeper and deeper into the forest, away from the cabin. I'm still alive because I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to die like some dumbass in a bad horror movie. I went back inside and made sure we were locked down tight. Since I can't call the ranger station, I'm posting this instead. I will keep you updated. It's Monday, and we got a hold of Faye's dad. The weather is supposed to clear up tomorrow, so he's going to come pick us up in his truck and help get my car down the mountain. I will keep you all informed. Only one more night in this place. I'll try to get some photos up. 9:30 p.m., Monday. I've been able to get online twice today. I wish I knew more about electronics, but I'm a history teacher, so I don't think I can fix the Wi-Fi or predict when it'll work. I can send or receive emails and some Reddit posts, but I cannot load some websites or view photos. Faye hasn't been feeling well since noon. She developed a stomach ache and has been intermittently throwing up. We both ate the same thing, and I feel fine, so I'm not sure what it is. She sometimes gets like this when she gets worked up. Although Elm an agnostic atheist, she is very Catholic and is pretty convinced that something supernatural is going on. No need for alarm at the moment. She does not have a fever, and I'm keeping her hydrated and in high spirits. She seems to be on the mend. Went to sleep about 1.5 hours ago. Some noises to report. Cackling or repetitive vocalizations in the forest, probably 100 yards out. The tree line starts at about 20 yards out, so this sound is coming from much deeper. Some movement spotted just behind the tree line at dusk, but could be elk, deer, etc. Couldn't see very much. Keeping all the curtains closed, windows locked, furniture in front of the front door or back door, and I'm checking on Faye every half hour. Her dad will be here in the late morning to pick us up or dig my car out. Another Redditor near us pointed out that I am an idiot for not double-checking the weather. You are correct. I promise I'll provide an update as a new post tomorrow should anything significant happen. I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. We are collecting ourselves. Sorry for any formatting issues. I'm writing this on my phone. Faye's dad picked us up in his truck. He brought his buddy with him, who is now following us in my car. A lot of things happened last night. Some things I won't share because I'm not sure how to interpret them yet. I'm not even sure I understand what happened. But here are the most important things. I also managed to get some recordings, which Lee tried to upload when we get home to California in a few days. I tried to stay awake last night until 1 a.m. because over the past few nights, That is the approximate time the noises change from rustling or branches cracking to voices. I didn't make it. I fell asleep on the couch with my laptop open, waiting for the Wi-Fi to come back. I think this was at about 12:30 a.m. I woke up right around 1:15 a.m. to a muffled voice. In my sleepy days, I struggled to figure out where it was coming from, thought it was just outside the living room window, so I sat there quietly trying to make the words out. It was a woman's voice and said things like, "A few days. It's not mine. Not alone." Okay, I got up and peeked out the curtains and didn't see anyone. But then the voice said, "It's my parents' house," and I knew the voice was Faye's. As I mentioned earlier, my fiancée has an undiagnosed sleep disorder and has extensive sleep talk and sometimes sleepwalks. She has had pronounced night terrors since she was a little kid. Lee, post a story on that someday. I walked into the bedroom to find Faye, sleeping on her tummy as usual. She didn't say anything else as I came in. Two things really disturbed me about this situation, though the first is that she appeared to be having a conversation with someone, which is actually quite common for her. But the person she was conversing with was interrogating her, asking her questions about herself, me, the cabin, etc. Second, in her sleep, Faye was imitating another voice. It wasn't hers that she was speaking with. She was altering the pitch and tone to sound like a different person. My modus operandi is to not wake her up when she has sleep disturbances. There's a story behind this. Expect one someday. Instead, I gently rub her back and hair, which calms her and puts her back to restful sleep. I did this for a few minutes, but then there was another noise, off in the distance outside. I got up and walked to the window to listen, and I think this was the first time that I really felt scared enough that I felt like we were in real danger. It was a child, singing in the dark. I couldn't really make out much of what he was saying, but I'm certain that it was a child, probably age 6-8, trying to sing a song. The snow had abated for a while now, and the stars were notably bright, so I could see all the way to the rim of the forest about 20 yards out. There was a figure standing there just past the first trees, back facing me, looking up at either the moon or the tops of the trees. It stood so still that I convinced myself it was a tree stump or something, and in a few minutes, it was no longer visible. My skeptical nature compels me to be reasonable and say my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I turned around, Faye was sitting straight up in bed, eyes closed. She does this a lot in her sleep. She craned her neck and said something like, "Don't let them in," or "Don't let him inside." She was still doing the weird voice, so I woke her up. Faye and I sat in the bedroom with the lights on, talking about what we should do. I tried to get online to send an email to her parents, but of course, it doesn't work when you need it. We agreed to stay in the same room and try to fall back asleep. At one point, I got up to get her some water. She hadn't vomited in several hours now and was feeling a lot better, and out the kitchen window, I saw flashes of pale light. They weren't like the flashes you'd see when someone walks through the woods with a flashlight. They were more like if someone had a lantern that they could slowly turn on and off. I flicked on the porch lights to the front and side of the house, hoping that it would discourage anyone from trying to approach, but as I walked back to the bedroom, I saw the distinct outline of a person through the window curtain in the living room. They were pressed against the glass with their hands on it, trying to peer inside. Since it was dark in the living room and bright outside, I could clearly see their silhouette. I shouted and approached the window, but the person ran off before I pulled the curtain open. Faye slept soundly, but I continued to hear voices outside, different ones, on and off all night until dawn. I wrote several of them down. I couldn't sleep, so I camped out in the living room. Kept the bedroom door open so could hear Faye if she started talking again. The voices would go away for hours, and then start back up again. At one point, I fell asleep, because I was awoken by the sound of a light switch flicking on and off. From the couch I could see light from outside, going on and off in patterns of 5. I can't explain why this disturbed me so much, but it did, and one imagined some kind of horrible creature standing in my house somewhere, flipping the switch up and down and smiling. My first instinct was to check on Faye. and I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that she wasn't in bed. I started calling her name and pacing around the house, looking out the windows to see if she was outside. When I looked out the kitchen window, there she was, sitting on the hood of my car about 30 feet out in the driveway. Her back was to me, and she was staring off into the forest. She was absolutely rigid, just the way she sits up in bed when she's asleep. Faye has sleepwalked all over the house back home in California. Il found her in the kitchen and the downstairs hallway and the living room, but she's never gone outside. I shouted her name from the kitchen, but the second I did, Faye jumped off my car and dashed into the woods at full sprint. She never looked back at me. I started flipping out and screaming her name over and over. I scrambled to grab my boots to go after her, but the second pulled the front door open. Faye called out my name from behind. She was standing in the hall, looking confused, asking me what was wrong. Apparently she had been in the bathroom. In my masculine crusade, I'd forgotten to check there. I looked out at my car and into the forest, and honestly, the first thought that came to my mind was, "You clever motherfucker." Needless to say, we stayed up the remaining few hours until dawn, intermittently writing down the voices we heard, which faded away and became less frequent with the passage of time. I try to get the recordings up in a few days. For now, here's that list of voices we heard. We recalled some of the voices from the previous nights from memory, but I just figured you'd like to know what was being said throughout the duration of this lovely cabin experience. I will return to Colorado, but fuck Pikes Peak. The "e's" indicate that the words were very unclear. A man's voice, vaguely familiar, but couldn't put a face to it, over the past several nights. "Hello, oh God, look at it, look, hello, desperate, don't, they see in the dark," kind of wailed dramatically. I'm lost, watch you, woe my, woe my," growled hacking sound, reminded me of Gollum's very dark. "I see those lights," shouted in anger. "Come down there," shouted. Don't smile, I see you," could have been "goat smile." A woman's voice, sounded age 20-ish. "Last night," gasp in horror or surprise over and over. "Lay it on the ground and burn or turn it." "Lala layla, alalala, not melodic at all." She talks in her sleep. She's talking to me now. Threatening, malicious voice. A child, sounded about 6 to 8 years old, indeterminate sex. "Last night." Crying, whining, occasional laughter. Voice of Faye's grandfather. "A few nights ago." Lots of indiscernible groaning. Calls for help. Something about the war. "They's bodies still in the ground, never found 'em. But they're right here, oh. They found it. Thee found it. Ah well, I'm standing in the same place, 20 years. By the way, I forgot to check to see if that dream catcher was still there out back. You're welcome to drive out there and look for yourself though." So that night, we sat down with Faye's mom, Laura, in her bedroom while her dad was watching the news downstairs. Her mom was so upset at the stories we told her, teaming she was visibly disturbed to the point of being in tears. She kept apologizing to Faye and hugging her. Laura told us that they'd purchased that cabin from their good friend, Jennifer, I think, who moved to Nevada about 20 years ago, and that Jennifer and her husband had complained about all sorts of weird experiences while living there. Her husband Tom, like myself, was fond of hiking and exploring the woods, and collected tons of arrowheads and other neat trinkets he'd found on his travels around Pikes Peak. But Jennifer started having dreams about Tom being dragged off into the woods from their bedroom. She had all kinds of horrific nightmares about him being skinned and pinned up in the trees like some kind of macabre artwork. Jennifer said that while Tom was at work, she would occasionally hear the voice of her daughter, who died in childhood of some kind of bone cancer, calling "Mommy" from the edge of the forest. Jennifer's doctors claimed it was the medication she was on and changed her meds. Tom got a new job in Vegas, and they basically noped out of there. On a lighter note, Tom hanged himself in the garage 2 years after they moved. No note or anything. Anyway, Laura Faye's mom and Greg Faye's dad only used the cabin as a getaway in summers. Laura never experienced anything beyond weird feelings while she was there, and she chalked that up to all of the crazy stories Jennifer had told her. Greg, however, who suffers from PTSD-related nightmares occasionally, experienced exacerbated sleep disturbances in the cabin. Over the years he became reluctant to go there, and claimed that all of the things he'd seen in Vietnam came back to him when he slept there. Allegedly, some of the people he saw get killed would come back to talk to him in his dreams at that cabin. The last time he stayed there, he woke up in a dream to find a few of them sitting in his bedroom with him, maimed, rotted, etc. He privately maintained to Laura that he also heard their voices in the forests, crying, begging, screaming for their mothers, etc. Oh, and guess what time? He always heard them. Laura told us that she honestly did not believe there was anything really wrong with the cabin. Faye was extremely pissed and let her have it. They kind of ended our visit on a bad note. Later that night, I was up reading, and Faye was sleeping next to me. She always falls asleep before me. That girl could fall asleep on a pile of rocks. She started mumbling in her sleep, so I listened carefully, and here are a few things I heard her say. Never, no, I wouldn't. On the mountain, I can't. Why? His name? We don't know, It's Felix, my name. About 2 hours later, she woke me up by nudging me in her sleep and saying, "Tell the man in the hall to leave." This set me over the edge, so I got to go to the bathroom and get some water. I didn't find anything strange, had a very hard time falling asleep though. This morning, we heard back from the guy who went up to the cabin to check it for gas leaks or carbon monoxide. At the behest of a few scrupulous Redditors, the guy mentioned that radon is a really big problem in some of these old places in the mountains. He's some kind of super badass handyman with all kinds of equipment, so he wrangled up one of the peak rangers, and they went up to the place together. Apparently, there were tracks all around the house, a dozen pairs of them, like a large group of people had been wandering around looking in the windows. All of the windows and doors were sealed the way we left them. When they got inside, some stuff was moved around. The silverware drawer was emptied onto the kitchen floor and turned upside down. The power was completely dead. The weirdest thing was that there was water all over the bed and on the floor, but our guy checked for leaks in the ceiling and the bathroom pipes. Nothing had been stolen from the house, not even food. Some of the old clothes in the bedroom closet were strewn on the ground, but nothing stolen, like maybe someone was trying them on or smelling them. The ranger said that there were legends about the mountain, something about things that sort of act like people, but they come out of the old abandoned mines. Greg's friend couldn't remember the name the ranger gave them. It was in a native language. I asked Greg to ask the ranger about the sounds I heard, specifically the wachu, wachu, wolmai, wolmai, and he said it's a widely recognizable chant, but he doesn't know what it means. Anyone here have any idea? No radon, no carbon monoxide, and no gas. The place is all electric. He checked for mold, but said it was unlikely that there would be any all the way up there. He did say it's possible that there's some kind of electrical problem, and that this can sometimes cause people to feel very unsettled, and maybe have hallucinations. He has some kind of Geiger counter or a gadget that detects issues like this, but it was broken when he tried to use it. I'm going to keep a close eye on Faye. She's still shaken up about all this. If there's anything left to report, I'll let you know. Update: 4/21/2016. We have begun hearing voices outside of our home. Faye is really upset and feels that I might have exacerbated these strange circumstances by giving them widespread exposure online. I'm going to go dark for a few days and see if that helps. Don't worry about us. We have a few close friends looking out for us. They know the entire store. Hi everyone. I just want to make a quick update, as promised, because Faye and I are flying back to California shortly. Faye is back to normal, feeling great. I watched her eat a huge plate of chicken parmesan yesterday. The first thing I should mention is that Faye's father was very reluctant to talk about the cabin or the weird experiences we'd had there. He kept trying to change the subject, and was generally in a bad mood. which is pretty normal for him. He's a really grumbly Vietnam vet and has been in the army since he was young. His personality is exactly the way you'd imagine it. Faye asked him bluntly, "If something is wrong with that cabin, why would you let us go up there in the first place?" And his response was, "Talk to your mother." Over the weekend, my fiancée and I stayed in her parents' cabin up in Pikes Peak, Colorado. I made a Nozleep post about the disturbing events that transpired over the course of a few nights. Many people have messaged me for an update, but I stopped responding because things have gotten worse since we returned home to California. I feel it's time I say what's going on here. I'm sorry that this is long, but I want to document everything. Faye and I flew back from Colorado on Wednesday afternoon. She slept the entire flight, despite the noise, which amazed me. Can't sleep on planes because I'm absolutely terrified of flying. I'd rather stay another night in that cabin. When we got home, I ordered a pizza and she wolfed it down. Her appetite has returned in full force, which is great news. I mentioned this in my original post, but Faye has an undiagnosed sleep disorder. She has pronounced night terrors, sleep talking, and occasional sleepwalking. This disorder lies dormant 90% of the time, but it tends to flare up when she's under a lot of stress. If we're moving, she's changing jobs, or if a relative dies. And expect a night of horrifying talking and odd behavior. Needless to say, our experiences at the cabin have set Faye on edge. Although she's in high spirits, she's still afraid at night. I am too. That night after pizza, she fell asleep on the couch while we watched Wedding Crashers. At around 10 p.m., the movie ended, and I turned the TV off. As I brought our plates to the kitchen, I passed by the stairwell and heard a faint noise from upstairs that sounded like a man sighing. I shrugged it off and woke Faye up. We brushed our teeth and went to bed. Faye talked in her sleep a lot that night, and it started at about 1 a.m. I woke up to her calling out, "What did you do?" and "Do you need help?" and laughing. This isn't really unusual for her. She babbled occasionally, said a few funny things, etc. Woke up again around 4 and heard her talking, but this time, she was doing something she's never done before. We've been together for almost 5 years, and not once has she ever whispered in her sleep, but now she was whispering with her back turned to me. For a second, I thought someone was lying on the floor at her edge of the bed, talking back to her. This disturbed the shit out of me, so I sat up and leaned over her, trying to listen in the dark. The only thing I heard her say, discernibly, was shh. I asked her, "Faye, what are you talking about?" And she didn't respond. I said, "Who are you talking to?" And she replied, "Don't," and nudged me. Another unusual thing happened. At about 5:45 a.m., I woke up to Faye getting back into bed. She hurried into the bedroom from the hall and got back into bed quickly, making zero attempt not to wake me. First of all, Faye does not get up, ever. She sleeps like a dead horse, and even if she went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, which she never does, the bathroom is not down the hall, it's in our bedroom. When I asked her what she was doing the next morning, she claimed to have no memory of it. I spent all day Thursday thinking about why Faye was still acting weird. I was the one who found the dream catcher and got close to it. I was the one who interacted with the voices at the cabin. And then I remembered something on our last night in Colorado. At her parents' house, Faye got back into bed at around the same time, 5:45 a.m. I barely remembered because I was half asleep, but the image returned to my head. She'd been getting up really early for a few days. So last night, I set my phone's alarm to vibrate, and I put the time to 4:45 a.m. In the middle of the night, Faye started talking again. This time she was doing the same thing she did at the cabin, changing her voice to sound like someone else. In 5 years, she's sleep-talked a bunch, but has never whispered or changed her voice until recently. She said a few things, which I tried to commit to memory. La, la, falat, monotone, sasum, more like a sharp exhale followed, dayon, or te all, over and over. He's still in the trees. Where were you? Looked for you. And, oh, it's time. About the same time, I heard a noise outside, which sounded like an old man grumbling to himself about something. We live in Norcal, in a really woodsy town, so when you look out our bedroom window, there are tons of trees across the street. It was very dark, but I'm fairly certain I saw a man walking behind the first line of trees. He was too far away to be the one grumbling, but it is very unusual to see anyone over there this time of night. In fact, I have never seen anyone there at night, ever. Looking outside required me to open the curtains, which lit up our room with moonlight. When I looked back at the bed, Faye was lying there with her neck craned toward me, her eyes crazy wide and fixed on me. And her mouth was open. She issued this really frightening gurgly, drawn-out groan and flicked her tongue around. It looked like an epileptic fit in slow motion. Faye has definitely opened her eyes in her sleep, but never like this. She looked like a fucking murderer. I got so scared I called her name really loud and woke her up. She was confused and asked me why I was at the window. I lied and said I was just closing it because it was cold. I didn't want her to know I'd heard a voice. We talked a bit, but I skipped that because this is getting long. My alarm woke me up at 4:45 am, and one laid there awake, waiting for Faye to get up like she had been the past few nights. She breathes very rhythmically when she's asleep, so I can always tell how deep she's under. At around 5:20, she sat straight up, swung her legs out of the bed, and tiptoed down the hall. I followed behind. When I say that my fiancée tiptoed, I don't mean like a child on Christmas Eve. This was robotic, alien, inhuman. She moved like a meth-addicted ballerina zombie down the hall and stopped at the stairwell. Her breathing never changed. I just stood there in our bedroom, poking my head out into the dark hall. Faye looked down the stairs, still standing rigidly on the balls of her feet, swaying to and fro slightly. She did some weird shit. She touched her face slowly for several minutes, touched the banister, touched the wall, flicked the light on and off a few times, all the while maintaining her perfectly regular coma breathing. Then she reached an arm out in the motion of a bicep curl, stretching her fingers and wiggling them, then curling them, her hand and her arm back up to her face. I watched her do this motion for about 4 minutes. It looked like she was testing the limb, as if she'd never used it before. But then I realized she was actually communicating with someone on the first floor of the house. She was making a come here motion. With full confidence that Faye was sleepwalking, I walked into the hall and leaned over the half wall that overlooks the living room. It was totally dark down there. I couldn't see anything but the clock on the cable box. Faye stood there waving, smiling, making gestures, and then touching her face and pulling gently on her hair. I carefully ushered her back to bed and talked to her softly, trying not to actually wake her. She didn't resist, she never does, and went back to sleep without another word. I have zero clue what the fuck is going on. I told her this morning what she did, and now we have a doctor's appointment for her at 3 p.m. today. You don't have to read all of these former posts if you're new to my situation. All you need to know is that my fiancée Faye has a sleep disorder and has been sleep-talking or sleepwalking or having night terrors and other frightening sleep disturbances since she was a child. 2. We've been together 5 years. 3. We recently stayed at a cabin her parents own way up in the mountains in Colorado. Whereupon we discovered an enormous, handmade dreamcatcher in the woods out back, and began hearing creepy voices at night that mimicked people we knew, including family members who are dead. 4. My fiancée's sleep disturbances got out of control during our stay, and she appeared to be communicating with the things outside at night. Now, we are back home in California, but something might have followed us. I took Faye to see her doctor yesterday, and we hesitantly explained what was going on with her. I left out the paranormal stuff because I didn't want to get put in a ward. She seemed really concerned about Faye, ordered a blood test, gave her a physical, asked her about her diet and drugs, medications, etc. Faye and I are both non-drinkers, non-drug users, and neither of us are on medication. She wants Faye to be evaluated by a psychiatrist next week. For now, She gave her a sedative at night and some anti-anxiety medication. She wants us to get some fresh air and get out of the house, so we're going on a hike today. A Redditor named PixieEdix brought up the possibility that the child's voice outside the cabin asking, "When do we go in Seayide? When do we go in Celiad?" might not refer to inside the cabin, but rather inside Faye. This really worries me because it corroborates some of the strange behavior she's been exhibiting in her sleep. I contacted the park ranger, who is pretty sympathetic to our situation, and he's going to get in touch with some of the members of his tribe who have experience with spiritual guidance and medicine. He is convinced that Faye and I have attracted the attention of the ones who come out of the mines. Lucky us. More on that later. Some Redditors have recommended that I test Faye to see if it's really her, so yesterday evening, against my wallet's advice, I took her to our favorite steakhouse. I only ever order one meal there, medium tri-tip, house macaroni, tea cheese, and a bottled root beer. Faye only ever orders one meal there too, the BBQ chicken sandwich with mac cheese and a salad with ranch dressing, and a Coke. She drinks Coke only, her blood is mostly Coca-Cola. Faye took a long time deciding what to order, and ended up ordering a fucking New York strip. I jokingly told her to order for me too, and she said, "I don't know what you want." She also ordered water instead of Coke. Usually, we have arguments over how much Coke she drinks, and how I'm always trying to get her to hydrate better and just drink water. This was really unsettling to me. At the end of the night when we were walking back to my car, I kissed her temple and asked if she still liked it when I called her Noodle. She said, "Of course. I've never called her Noodle in my entire life. Her nickname has always been Monkey Toes." Long story. When we got home, she cracked open a Coke and got on Facebook, which is completely normal for her. This threw me off. One thing that's been on my mind lately is the song the little kid was singing outside the cabin. For those of you who don't know, in the middle of the night at this cabin in Colorado, we heard a child's voice coming out of the forest, singing an airy song. I've been catching myself humming it almost every day. Oh soul me ah do. I asked Faye if it meant anything to her, and I sang it to her while she was sitting on the couch. After a few repetitions, she sort of went blank, like she was hypnotized, and just wobbled back and forth ever so slightly for about 8 seconds, then snapped out of it, and said, "I don't remember that." Last night is when the shit hit the fan. I haven't gotten a full night's rest in over a week now, and it's starting to make me feel over emotional and crazy. Faye started murmuring in her sleep around 1, as usual, but I couldn't understand much of it. She sat up in bed, took the sheets off her legs like she was going to get up, but I grabbed her arm and asked her what she was doing. She said, "Tell them to leave." Her eyes were completely shut. I asked her, Who needs to leave?" She sat there for about 2 minutes, not speaking, just sitting straight up. I asked again, and she replied, "There's a man at the door." Then about 10 seconds later, and a woman at the bottom of the stairs. Of course, this made every single hair on my entire body bristle. I got up and went downstairs, turning on every single light as I went, and carrying my buck knife with me. Nobody was in our house. I looked in every single room downstairs, and even in the backyard. When I got back to the stairwell, I heard someone stomping around upstairs. Someone had turned the light to the upstairs hallway off. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, trying to listen, but the noises stopped. So I walked back up into our bedroom and got back into bed. It was likely that Faye had gotten up to go to the bathroom or sleepwalked a bit in the room and went back to bed. I fell asleep pretty fast, but woke up again only a few minutes later. Faye was gone. I heard movement down the hall, so I looked out into it, and I saw Faye coming out of the other bedroom. He staggered down the hall toward me, then stopped, turned around, and walked back in the other direction. She did this 7 to 8 times. She was walking in almost the same way as the night before, standing really high up on her toes, her legs totally rigid like they were made of cement, and her arms completely limp and flopping back and forth. It was extremely fucking terrifying seeing her move like that. She was totally graceless, it was like someone was testing out a human body for the first time. At that same moment, one heard a noise through the bedroom window and ran over to check. Thinking someone was really at the front door, you can see down to the front entryway from our bedroom window. Off in the distance, about 30 yards out, somebody was walking back and forth in the exact same way that Faye was. He was humming loudly and intermittently singing. The song sounded like the one I sang to Faye earlier, the one the child sang outside the cabin. I made this YouTube video explaining what happened. Basically, I ran back into the hall, woke Faye up, and brought her downstairs, opened the front door to get a better look at the man, but he was gone. Today, at the behest of a few Redditors, I asked Faye if she'd ever been to that cabin before we visited it. I don't know why I never thought to ask her this before. She said nothing about it when we stayed there for several nights. She was hesitant to answer me, and eventually admitted that she'd been there once, when she was 14. She and her parents went snowshoeing up the mountain. A few hours later, I emailed her mother and asked the same question. She told me Faye had gone to the cabin multiple times as a child, but stopped going when she went into high school. I can't figure out which one of them is lying to me. Because so many people have questions about Faye, she has agreed to do a filmed interview. If you post questions for her, it will film her responses and post them here within a few days. I haven't told Faye this, but I'm thinking of going back to the cabin and meeting with the ranger. He wants to do some ritual with the dream catcher we found. If it's still there, and he says he will bring his friends and try to cleanse the house and the surrounding area, this will cost me like $500 just to fly out there, but if this shit gets any worse, it might be worth it. Edit. A Redditor sent me a private message, telling me to investigate the guest room to see if Faye was doing anything in there. It turns out she was. She had written the number 5 on the window with her finger. I only saw it because of the condensation from the cold this afternoon. It's written backwards, so that someone standing in our backyard can read it. If you don't want to read the other posts, here is a brief synopsis. My fiancée Faye has had a sleep disorder since she was a little girl. It involves night terrors, sleepwalking, sleep-talking, etc. This condition is generally under control, but is exacerbated by stress. A few days ago we went on vacation and stayed in a cabin in Pikes Peak, Colorado. We found a creepy homemade dream catcher in the forest behind the cabin. And at night, we heard several voices calling out from the woods, saying all kinds of terrifying things. Sometimes the voices would mimic people we knew, including deceased relatives. Faye's sleep disturbances got much worse, and while sleep-talking one night, I overheard her answering strange questions about herself and me. When we returned to our home in California, her behavior became extremely erratic, and she is convinced that something has followed us back. I cannot tell you how much all of your support has meant to us over the past few days. Faye feels so good knowing that people are constantly asking about her health, and I feel like a few of your suggestions have literally saved her life, so thank you, from the bottom of my heart. I don't even know where to begin. So much has happened in the last two days. The sedatives and anti-anxiety meds the doctor gave to Faye work during the day, and she has been less stressed. However, at night, her behavior is still highly unusual. I have taken the overwhelming consensus of Redditors seriously. I went out and purchased a bunch of child-proofing materials for the house to prevent Faye from harming herself or going outside while sleepwalking. Elle could not afford a bunch of cameras, sorry, I'm a teacher. I bought these knob covers that little kids and hopefully sleepwalkers are too stupid to figure out. Outlet covers in case she tries to jam anything into them. And I hid the kitchen knives. I also brought in a spiritual healer after very carefully searching for one. It is my opinion that 99% of them are frauds and hucksters. But this woman did not charge us anything, and she was recommended by close family. She is the daughter of a Shoshone tribal elder. The long and short of it is, she believes our house is not haunted. However, she says that Faye feels very off. She said she couldn't get a good read on her at all, and that there is a dark cloud over her. Still suspicious of this woman, I took her to a random upstairs window and told her that I had seen something outside near the edge of the woods. Mimicking Faye's sleepwalking, which was true, but I pointed out the wrong window, to the wrong part of the forest. She quietly examined the other windows upstairs, and said that our bedroom window, the correct one, gave her a terrible feeling. She said, "He watches from here. She can hear him whispering at night." We told her everything. She was horrified by our story. The look on her face unsettled me so much. It was like she'd never heard of anything this bad. She went out of the room and had to collect herself downstairs. The woman prayed for several minutes, sang a beautiful song in a language I can't even begin to describe, and sagged our entire house. She put some kind of crushed herbs on the ground in front of the 2 doors that lead into our home. Then she told me, in private, "You are dealing with the hollow ones." She said its name, her ancestral language, but I can't even come close to remembering or spelling it. She said that one is infatuated with Fae, and will do absolutely anything to get inside our house, but the process takes time. I don't know if I actually buy any of this, but at least she didn't sell it to me. We also had Faye take a pregnancy test, as recommended by many Redditors. The woman said it was a good idea. Good news, not pregnant, and the woman stood in the bathroom with her like a prison guard so she couldn't fuck with the test. We then thanked the woman and she left. That night, we attached a little jingle bell from Faye's Christmas-themed lingerie to a hair scrunchie and put it around her ankle. I'm such a light sleeper, there's no way she'd be able to get out of bed without waking me. Faye fell asleep really fast due to the meds, out like a light in a few minutes. I lay in bed thinking about the 5 she wrote on the window in her sleep a few nights earlier, and reasoned that it meant 5 m, and not 5 days, as some Redditors had speculated. This makes sense because she's been getting up at that time to sleepwalk every night for 4 nights now, since the 5 was written backwards, facing the backyard. I reasoned that it was a signal to whoever or whatever was out there. She was going to try to let it inside. I eventually fell asleep, and one had a fucking horrifying dream. Something came into the house, through the sliding glass door to the yard, and walked up the stairs and into our bedroom. It sat at the edge of our bed, rubbing Faye's foot and staring at us. It was completely wreathed in shadow. I couldn't see it at all except for a silhouette, just like the video one posted about what I saw a few nights earlier. I woke up soaked in sweat and couldn't fall back asleep for a while. 5 a.m. rolled around, and the reliable little jingle bell woke me right up. In her sleep, Faye did something she's never done before. She stood up on the bed, rigid as a board, and stared out the window. I shouldn't really say stared, because her eyes were closed. But she was alert, watching, listening. She remained there like a statue for at least 5 minutes. One also didn't move. I just watched. Then she slowly raised her hand and started waving at someone outside. My skin crawled when she did that. She definitely knew someone was there, even with her eyes shut. Faye then stepped off the bed and darted to the bedroom door, trying to get out into the hallway, but the child-proof knob cover stopped her. She couldn't figure it out in her sleep. She did another thing she's never done while sleepwalking. She got extremely angry and started pulling on the cover. She shrieked and growled like a trapped animal. After about 30 seconds of this, she woke herself up. She started crying really hard and told me that in her nightmares, she had seen a man without a face, walking through the halls of our home, whispering her name and looking for her. I sat up and talked with her for an hour, and then we went back to sleep. When I woke up again, it was around 10 a.m. for 24, and Faye was gone. The bedroom window was open. As I walked downstairs, I saw her in the backyard, reading. Every single window in the entire house was open, and it was like 55 degrees outside. She told me the smell of the sage made her nauseous, and she wanted to get it out of the house. I couldn't smell anything. I suggested that we go to the church downtown today to speak with the priest. She's Catholic, but she refused. So I had my buddy Kay, who is a very, very devout Catholic, come over with some holy water and his crucifix. Apparently, Kay told his priest what was going on, and the guy very reluctantly blessed the water and told us to call him. Faye was irritated that I'd done this without her permission, and waited outside while Kay set up a few little crosses and his big crucifix around the house. Faye refused to have any holy water put on her. She kept saying, "I'm freezing. Don't you dare." She's going to be super pissed when she finds out I put that shit in her shampoo and conditioner bottles. She was in a really nasty mood all morning, but after we went out for lunch, she was feeling better and agreed to film the interview video and answer questions from Redditors. While filming, I noticed that she wasn't wearing her engagement ring and realized she hadn't been wearing it in several days. I asked her where it was, and she said it was in our luggage, which we've now only partially unpacked. Later, when I checked, it wasn't there. I'm worried about this for a few reasons. I will post the video as soon as she watches and approves it. She's self-conscious. Expect it within a few days. I've finally begun moving some more of the photos from the cabin onto my laptop too. I cannot bring myself to listen to those voice recordings yet. Since this is getting over long, flash forward to last night. I got up at about 1 a.m. to pee, and I knocked the bell scrunchie off the bed. Faye had taken it off and was gone. I got angry and scared at the same time. I found her sitting on the stairs, looking down into the dark, spreading her arms open like she was trying to get a child to climb the staircase for its first time. She was smiling with her eyes closed, as one usually do. I gently got her up and walked her back to bed. When I laid down next to her, she leaned over, and with her eyes still closed, said, "They're gonna kill you," and then icked my face. I called her parents today to arrange a flight back to Colorado. They're paying for it. Her mom, Laura, admitted to me that something had happened to Faye as a child at the cabin. That is where her sleep disturbances started, when she was 5. I have had enough, and they can tell. They spoke with the ranger at Pikes Peak again, and he's arranging for me to meet with him and his buddies from their tribe who knows the entire history of the area, and all of the hauntings that other visitors have reported. Faye will be staying with my 2 best friends, R&J, and Jay's fiancée. I've known all 3 of them since high school, and they are completely informed about all these events. They will guard her with their lives. In short, I'm going back to the cabin alone. One'll update soon. But no matter what happens, I'm not going to drag this out any further on Nosleep. I've polluted this place enough with my problems. Edit. Folks, I won't be at the cabin alone. I'm meeting the ranger and his friends there. His 2 friends are from his tribe. Nation? Sorry, I don't know the correct terminology. And they are healers. They know all about Pikes Peak and the ongoing situation. I'm not going out easy. Update. Dropped Faye off at my friend's place. They'll take care of her. Heading to the airport now. No idea when I'll get back on. We'll try tonight if I'm not too tired after landing. Update 4/26 midnight Colorado. I'm at Faye's parents. Exhausted. Talked to her parents extensively. Got word from my friends Faye started feeling really ill. Wanted to go home. They've moved the whole posse over to our house, which has been SAG blessed protected, covered in holy water and crucifixes, and she is allegedly doing much better now. Richard and Jason's fiancée Allison are all sleeping over for a few nights to ensure Faye is alright. Heading to the cabin tomorrow morning to meet the ranger. Update 4/26, 9:45 a.m. Colorado. Leaving in 1 hour to go to the cabin. Sorry for typo. I said it was the 27th by accident. Update 4/26, 5:15 p.m. Spotty bullshit Wi-Fi. Snowing. Ike crazy up here. Met with the ranger. Investigated the cabin. Nothing unusual inside except a lampshade removed from a lamp, which he claims was not like that when he came in here a few days ago. His friends will be here tomorrow morning. I'm alone for tonight. I went outside for just a minute when it was still light to grab some things from the truck, and heard 2 voices. Making short videos with my phone. Will try to upload. Job date 4/27, 9:12 p.m. So much has gone down. I am so terrified and sleep deprived. I'm writing a huge post right now with everything that's happened. I will post it tomorrow morning because I know I can't finish it tonight. I'm going to fall asleep in my chair. Sorry to keep you waiting. You don't feel like reading my other posts? Just read this. Skip to below the links if you're up to speed. My fiancée Faye has had a sleep disorder since she was a little girl. Night terrors, sleepwalking, sleep talking, etc. This condition is generally under control, but is exacerbated by stress or trauma. A few days ago, we went on vacation and stayed in a cabin owned by her parents in Pikes Peak, Colorado. We found a creepy homemade dream catcher in the forest behind the cabin, and at night, we heard a voice or voices calling out from the woods, saying all kinds of terrifying things. Sometimes it would mimic people we knew, including deceased relatives. Faye's sleep disturbances got much worse, and while sleep-talking one night, I overheard her answering strange questions about herself and me. When we returned to our home in California, her behavior became extremely erratic, and she is convinced that something has followed us back. Because of her worsening condition, I had the house blessed and purged, and flew back to Colorado to demand answers from Faye's parents and to revisit the cabin. The Pikes Ranger, who is a Pueblo Indian, agreed to bring tribal elders to investigate the cabin and nearby forest. My 3 closest friends are taking care of Faye back home. It has been an interesting few days. I have so much to say, so I'm going to try to be terse. Sorry that it's taken so long to report. I really am trying. All of your questions and analysis of these events have really helped us through the struggle. Some of your observations are what brought me back here to Colorado. I landed in Denver International Airport 2 nights ago and stayed with Faye's parents in Arvada. While there, we all sat down and I basically forced them to tell me what was going on. A Redditor pointed out that Laura, Faye's mom, appeared to be lying or hiding something. Another Redditor asked me if Faye had ever been to the cabin before, since her family owned it for almost 3 decades. I had never even thought of this. When one asked Faye, she said no, and that her parents just used it as a getaway a few times a year. Faye's mom told me that she'd been there multiple times when she was little. This time, Faye's parents told me a different story. They claimed this was the truth. Faye had been to the cabin as a toddler a few times, and when she was 5, something happened to her. While Greg, Faye's dad, and Faye were outside, playing in the snow, Faye wandered off toward the edge of forest to look in. She was following a voice. Greg was building a snowman and keeping his eye on her. They were only a few dozen yards apart. Allegedly, Greg heard Faye talking, answering questions, but he couldn't hear anyone else talking. He started walking toward her to bring her back, and he heard her say, "Faye, no, it's Faye. I can't see you." A moment later, little Faye began shrieking and crying. She went stiff as a board, and Greg had to pick her up and haul her back inside. She was almost catatonic and would go through bouts of total silence or inconsolable hysterics for several hours, until Greg and Laura decided to go back down the mountain and take her to a hospital. Greg claims he never saw anyone in the woods, and never heard any voices speaking to Faye. The doctors thought she had an epileptic seizure, and to this day, Faye does not remember ever going to the cabin. When I took H, she acted like she'd never seen it before. I believe that if Faye did remember being traumatized as a child, she'd never want to go back, so I really think she's blocked out the whole experience. And when we visited it a week ago, she thought it was her first time going. In Laura and Greg's subsequent visits to the cabin without Faye, Greg experienced terrible nightmares in which dead people entered the bedroom and sat on the ground in bed, watching him sleep. In the morning, Greg let me borrow his truck, but refused to go to the cabin with me. He told me when I left, "We let you kids go up there because we honestly wanted to believe there was nothing actually wrong with the place." They used us to validate their denial, but I don't hold them responsible. I'd never have believed any of this if I were them. Dreams and a frightened child do not a haunting make. I arrived in Pikes Peak around 1 p.m. yesterday, and the ranger met me at the cabin. We investigated the place and didn't find anything unusual, except that a single lampshade had been removed from one of the lamps and placed on the couch. We checked out the nearby woods. I was kind of surprised to discover that the creepy, enormous dream catcher was still there. The ranger told me he did not recognize it, and it was not something that his people made. He told me not to mess with it until his friends showed up. He told me he'd return with them in the morning, and left. That night, some shit happened. Greg told me that he'd hidden a .357 Magnum in the closet, so I retrieved it and a really deux-piece purple bathrobe and felt a little better. Don't worry, I know how to shoot and how to keep it safe. Right around sunset, I walked out to Greg's truck to grab a few things I'd neglected to bring in earlier, and one heard two distinct voices chattering in the woods. It was snowing like crazy and the wind was howling. But above the storm, I heard a gruff, masculine voice, and a younger, adolescent male voice. They were both yammering incomprehensible gibberish from two different places. I hurried back inside and locked the door. The stuff they were saying was pure madness. It made no sense. Put them up there in the trees, and take. Walk on down there. Go ahead. I just sat there imagining psychotic cannibals jabbering with their tongues hanging out and eyes rolled back in their skulls. I figured they'd come out of the woods as soon as it was dark. I tried to reach out to Faye back home, but my phone wouldn't get any reception in the cabin. The storm was too strong. I tried to play video games on the SNES, but I was so distracted by all of the sounds outside. Every single noise the blizzard produced caught my ear, and so my imagination manifested all kinds of horrifying creatures slinking around out there in the dark. I tried to reach out to Faye back home, but my phone wouldn't get any reception in the cabin. The storm was too strong. T tried to play video games on the SNES, but was so distracted by all of the sounds outside. Every single noise the blizzard produced caught my ear, and so my imagination manifested all kinds of horrifying creatures slinking around out there in the dark. When I finally went to bed, the wind died down a bit, and I heard a few more voices. There was a distant, high-pitched wail that echoed across the entire mountain. There was a child crying, saying something like, "Put me down in the hole. And, it's so deep you can crawl forever." But his voice sort of glitched. It would suddenly become deeper, as though a grown man were doing an impression of a little kid. I also heard someone hacking and vomiting and crying, begging for help. I didn't fall for any of it. I'm 28 years old, and this is the most afraid I've ever been in my entire life, even with Faye walking around like a fleshy marionette and calling out to a presence in the dark of my own home. On the time when was getting into bed. Approximately 12:45 a.m., there was a gentle tapping sound on the window in the living room. It was soft, like a neighbor who was reluctant to bother me. I stood there in the bedroom with the door open, holding my breath, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. Then one heard it again, so I crept down the short hall and peeked around the corner, just in time to see a figure walking past the windows and toward the front door, with the curtains drawn. I couldn't make out anything but a big shadow. Then, it knocked on the door. It was a gentle knock. A man's voice called out softly, "Hello?" I just listened intently and tried to keep silent. Eventually, he knocked again and said, "Hello, need to speak with you." He was speaking through clenched teeth. He was either extremely cold or extremely angry. I very carefully stepped back into the bedroom to grab the gun, but the goddamn place is so old the doors creak. I barely tapped the bedroom door as I passed, and it squealed like a dying pig. Then the man outside said, just above a whisper, "I know you're there." For just a moment, in my lethargy, I considered the possibility that this was one of the ranger's friends, or maybe somebody else who lived on the mountain. I was never going to open the door, but stupidly, I figured talking to it couldn't hurt. I say, because I immediately stopped believing there was a human being on the other side of the door the moment I opened my mouth. I said, "Who the fuck is it?" as assertively as I could. The second I stopped talking, whoever it was out there repeated my question, while mimicking my voice accurately. It almost sounded like an echo. Then he said, "May I come in, please?" His voice was a little shaky, but it definitely sounded like me. Unnervingly similar to me, but he was still clenching his teeth, so I could hear the difference. I pointed the gun at the door. It was dark in the house, so he couldn't see what I was doing through the curtain, and said, "If you don't get the fuck out of here right now, Lee'll blow you in half." For those of you who don't know what a 357 can do to a person, a slug to the chest essentially makes you into a human milkshake, and that's after passing through 2 inches of oak door. We both just stood there for a dreadfully long minute. It started testing out my voice, groaning and whispering and muttering. It said a lot of things, but I only remember a few of them. "What's your name? What's your name?" A little cabin, for the weekend, and then a bunch of lip smacking and chewing noises. They're lying. They're lying. The ones out, la 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 la, not singing, but just flailing his tongue around and making noises like a child would. You aren't alone in there. And I'm not alone out here. What's your name? And, you go up in the trees or down in the hole, that's where you go. Oh. They'll find you, either way. The sound of my own voice making these horrific noises and phrases set every inch of my skin on fire. I can hardly describe the physical sensation of fright, this intense. It was almost like having a bad fever, hot and cold and wet and sticky all at the same time. Shouted for it to leave, and said was armed. Considered fring off round, but that's a decision you can't take back. And my number one rule is to only fire when I'm certain I've got a target and a clear reason. I am proud to say that I can use my voice a lot better than whatever it was that mimicked me. I'm a soft-spoken guy, but I came down like a fucking hurricane screaming, "I will fucking kill you." He replied simply, in a softer tone of my own voice, "Will fucking kill you." Then it went back to babbling gibberish and knocking politely on the door over and over and over. After another minute or two, it suddenly stopped. The last thing it said was, "Know where she is." Then, it kicked the door, and I mean, harder than any human could possibly kick a door, and ran off. The boom was so loud, I couldn't believe the door didn't implode in its frame. The person or thing bounded down the wooden patio and off into the snow. And I swear on my life and honor, it sounded like a horse or some other huge four-legged animal charging off into the woods. A child's laughter rang out, and then everything was silent. Needless to say, I remained in a cat-like state of delirious paranoia for the rest of the night. The storm picked back up, and I did not hear anything else. I spent the whole night debating whether the thing at the door was talking about Faye. I tried to convince myself that it was just yammering more nonsense, like all the voices I've heard up here, but the way it spoke, that sentence haunts me even now as I write this. Elt's voice, my voice, was purposeful and restrained. Ilt chose the words carefully, and it knew exactly what to say. Needless to say, I remained in a cat-like state of delirious paranoia for the rest of the night. The storm picked back up, and I did not hear anything else. I spent the whole night debating whether the thing at the door was talking about Faye. I tried to convince myself that it was just yammering more nonsense, like all the voices I've heard up here, but the way it spoke, that sentence haunts me even now as I write this. Elt's voice, my voice, was purposeful and restrained. Ilt chose the words carefully, and it knew exactly what to say. I've been thinking a lot about what Redditors have been saying about Faye being some kind of doppelganger. When I first saw the nude woman on my car, I thought it was a trick to lure me into the woods, where the voices lie. I thought the real Faye stopped me from leaving the cabin, but many of you have pointed out that the reverse could be entirely possible. Given how the Faye I took home to California is behaving, given how she has failed all of my tests, and given how her engagement ring has been missing since we got home, so I sat there for hours, considering whether I should go out into the woods during broad daylight to search for my fiancée. Of course, it is a stupid idea, but now understand why people in horror movies do idiotic things. If I'm not looking for her, or for answers, why am I here? I need to know what I saw that day in the driveway. I need to know if there are many voices or just one, and I need to know how to get all this back to normal. I listened to music on my iPod and desperately tried to distract myself by reading news articles online until daybreak. Most of them wouldn't load, because the gods of internet have cursed this cabin. Round for I got up to get some food from the kitchen, and I opened the window curtain a tiny bit to see if anything was going on outside. A ton of snow had fallen. At the rim of the forest, dozens of yards out, I could see a distant figure standing perfectly still in the moonlight. He was facing away, staring off into the darkness of the woods. I checked on him every 20 minutes since then. He never moved. When the sun rose around 6:15 a.m., he was gone. I never saw his face. Today, the ranger and his two buddies came to the cabin as promised. They were instantly likable and warm. One of them, Tai, we pronounced T-Way, is a medicine man in his 60s, and was especially cool. The other was his son Nathan, who was probably just a few years older than me. They told me all kinds of interesting lore about Pikes Peak and surrounding areas, and then proceeded to tell me a disturbing story that they believe explains the strange activity on the mountain. For the sake of brevity, I will relay this in my next post. The ranger gave me one of his facility's satellite phones to stay in contact with him in case of emergencies. I used it to call Faye, but she didn't answer, so I called Jason and Richard, who are presently caring for her. Apparently Faye had become inexplicably outraged after taking a shower, threw an enormous tantrum, and locked herself in our bedroom. She refused to eat for the rest of the night. Allison and Jason slept in the guest room and Richard slept on our couch downstairs and worked late on his commissions. He's a digital artist. He told me that around 1 a.m., the same time I had my visitor, Faye ran downstairs into the kitchen, eyes closed, and started drinking out of the sink faucet. Then she turned around and stared, eyes still shut, at Richard while he sat at the breakfast table. She said, "Felix," to which he replied, "He's in Colorado, Faye, remember?" And then she said, "We sent him there to die." Then she sat down right there on the kitchen tiles and went back to sleep. I've instructed my friends only to wake Faye if she does anything serious, so they observed my rules and got her back in bed without much of an issue. For all the crazy shit Faye does when she's asleep, at least she never gets violent. The guys put her back into bed easily enough. The next day, Allison bailed on the whole project. She said she was awake all night, listening to Faye whispering through the wall. Faye told Allison about how there was a man in the house, and he was asking about her. My flight home is the day after tomorrow, so I'm going to have to figure all this shit out real quick. I'm going to take a nap. It's nice and bright outside. No voices. Good night. Peas, as soon as I get home, we'll put up the Faye video. I know I keep saying this, but I really did not expect to suddenly return to Colorado. I swear I will put it up, and then that will be the end of it. I resent myself for turning this into such a long and ridiculous blog of my experiences. My first night back at the cabin was the most terrifying experience of my life. You can read about it here if you haven't. The next morning, Wednesday, the ranger showed up with his friends, Taiwi, a Pueblo medicine man, and his adult son, Nathan. These people are amazing. They were instantly likable and sympathetic to my situation. T mentioned them in a tiny update in my last post, but here is what happened. Lore and legends. Taiwi is an incredible storyteller. He told me that Pikes Peak and the surrounding area was inhabited by the Ute, Manitou, Arapaho, Pueblo, Anasazi, and other Native American groups at various times. In the 1860s, when the gold rush was in full swing, many Indians were violently displaced because of mining operations there. They were torn away from their sacred lands, which was catastrophic to their cultures. Taiwi stressed that historically, Americans have not understood the significance of land and names to Native Americans, and this is critical to understanding the supernatural presence on the mountain. The major world religions like Christianity and Hinduism and Islam are universal. They can be practiced anywhere. You can pick up your whole life and move to Kentucky or Scotland or Istanbul, and you'll still be whatever religion you are. Your God still hears your prayers. He still intervenes in your life. But Native Americans practice land-based religions. The land they inhabit is a part of their creation stories. It's not that the land belongs to them, it's that they belong to the land, and both are in a symbiotic relationship with one another. History is embedded in the landscape. A person is reminded of specific lessons and wisdom when they see a part of the land. The mouth of this river has a story attached to it. That fallen tree has a story attached to it. A battle was won here. A chief died there. Peace was made between tribes with a feast here. When a native group is forced out of its homeland, the people lose their history. What's worse, they leave behind the places where their dead are buried. Since the dead are bound to that place, the Indians who left no longer have spiritual connections to their ancestors, and thus, to their gods. Their medicines and magic no longer work. they forget the names of sacred places. As the names and history and wisdom are forgotten, the tribe's spiritual power evaporates. Taiwi said that when Pikes Peak was taken, a group of disgruntled Utes descended on the miners and slaughtered a bunch of them, because a complex network of alliances and peace treaties. These Utes were punished by another tribe. They dug holes in the ground and slit the Utes' throats. Then they buried them upside down in the holes with their legs sticking out of the ground, so that wolves would feast on their calves. That was supposed to be the end of it, but then something else happened. The legend says that these dead Utes arose from the tainted ground one night. Because their flesh had been flayed from the hips down, they looked like walking skeletons. They hobbled into the Arapaho camps and took women and children back up the mountain. They forced them deep into one of the mines, never to leave again. The howls of women and children have been reported on the mountain for over 100 years now. The Utes and Arapaho engaged in blood feuds, sometimes called mourning wars, for years over this. They exchanged curses, executed and skinned and tortured each other. They stained the once sacred earth on Pikes Peak with rivers of blood. I was pretty mortified by this story. I just kind of sat there with the ranger while Taiwi and Nathan blessed the cabin. They burned sage and tobacco inside and outside, and used crushed herb dust to cover their hands. They made a handprint on every window, and drew small symbols in ash at the top of the front door, inside and outside. They gave me bundled sage or cedar or hawthorn, and told me to burn it if anyone tried to get inside. It drives bad spirits insane. Then, they provided me with small pouches filled with herbs and blessed objects to wear around my neck, and in my pockets whenever I went outside. Nathan gave me a totem that he wears around his neck, and told me to give it to Faye. Then they sang a really incredible chant in their language. It lasted about 15 minutes. I was blown away. I fucking love these guys. Then, we went outside. I showed them the dream catcher, and they told me that they had never seen anything like it. The dream catcher is made with 3 branches woven together with hair, and it has old yarn or wool string with glass beads criss-crossing the center in a pattern. It is old and handmade. Taiwi told me not to touch it or move it. If you find an object of power and do not know who made it or what it protects, you should leave it alone. I asked him if it could be evil, and he said, maybe. I got them up to speed on everything that has happened. I said that a lot of my friends Redditors, but I didn't explain that, suspected that the Fae at my house in California was a duplicate, and that the real Fae was somewhere in the woods. Taiwi and Nathan disagreed with each other on whether that could be, but we searched the woods looking for signs of my Fae. We found nothing. I told them about the missing ring, and they said exactly what many Redditors have said. If Faye loved the ring, and it was powerfully symbolic to her, it could be used by a bad spirit to harm her. They told me to find it at all costs. They also told me that if Faye indeed were still here on the mountain, she was certainly dead. And the moment we've all been waiting for. Taiwi named the creature that was tormenting us. He said his people call it Atan Onatagua, the imposter. Bad spirits inhabit the land everywhere, and sometimes they get the opportunity to use a tragedy like the Pikes Peak massacres to commandeer a human figure and walk the earth partly mortal. In the case of the imposter, they collect animal and human parts piecemeal wherever they can, and stitch them together. This is why they walk strangely, vocalize strangely, and why they never show their faces or come out during the day. They cannot pass for humans. I asked Taiwi why I always see someone facing away from me at the edge of the forest, and he said it is because it does not want me to know its identity, but eventually the imposter would come for me, wearing Faye's skin and teeth and hair, and try to convince me that it was her. When I asked him what it wanted, he said, nobody knows. He also told me that there is power in names, as many Redditors have stated, and that I should not speak its name, especially not to it, because that could provoke it. Of the voices I was hearing in the forest every night, Taiwi said, they practice what they hear. For decades, it makes it easier for them to hunt. The freaky shit. Taiwi, Nathan, and the ranger left at sunset, and I spent the rest of the evening thinking about all of this, and I think Liv figured a lot of things out. Around 9 p.m. something disturbing happened. I used the satellite phone the ranger gave me to call Faye. She actually answered, and was just lying in bed reading. We had a great conversation. I told her I missed her so much, and that one was up here trying to solve what was happening. I told her I wanted to have a family with her. She said that she was feeling better, and had actually gone a whole night without sleepwalking or terrifying Jason and Richard, my buddies who are looking after her while I'm here in Colorado. After about 15 minutes of talking, I started hearing sounds outside. I heard footsteps crunching in the dry snow, and I heard a voice, my voice. It said things like, "Flight, insomnia, miss you, see you soon." The thing had been standing near the window, mimicking my conversation with Faye. I told Faye I'd call her back later, and hung up the phone, then went silent. The thing walked around the cabin slowly, trying to figure out if I had moved, and kept mumbling and repeating a few phrases as it went. Finally, it came and knocked on the door. Its knock was gentle, just like last night. I was a little bit less scared because of all the blessings Tywee had put on the cabin, but I still held onto the gun just in case any shit went down. He spoke to me in my own voice, and the first thing he said was, "The hole will fill with snow and blood." So yeah, that amped up my fear quite a bit. Every hair on the back of my neck bristled. Do you know the feeling of being so scared that your vision turns hyperreal? Everything looks like a realistic video game, so everything looks just slightly off. Then it knocked again and said, "Hello, may I come in?" I simply said, "No, leave." Then it knocked for another 30 seconds or so, and said, "What is your name?" "Hello." I lied and said, "My name is Daniel." "Now leave. You can't come in." The thing started knocking harder, a lot harder, non-stop, and said, "What is your name? What is your name?" It was terrifying to hear my voice coming from the other side of the door, and to hear rage building in that voice. I said again, "My name is Daniel," but the thing just kept yammering and asking the same question. It would occasionally say things like, "Ticket, ticket, rental car. You go up in the trees. The hole, down in the hole. What is your name? May I know your name?" Then I had an idea. I'm really good with fake accents, and when I was a child my first language was German. Dad immigrated to Boston and met my mom. I started speaking in a thick accent, talking about my day, and then started shouting in German. I recited a poem I know by Hermann Hesse, Die Frauen von Revea Tragen. My visitor went silent and stopped knocking. I could tell it was just listening. So then I started shouting in a British accent, reciting lines from V for Vendetta, my favorite film of all time. I shouted, "Thank you," in every single language I know. One once committed to learning it in 100 languages and stopped around 20. My unwanted guest just sort of stammered a little bit, trying to mimic me, but failed to do so. I was no longer speaking in any recognizable pattern or tone. Eventually, it just started growling the sounds Faye and one heard in the forest when we first stayed at the cabin. Wachu, wolmai, and started scratching and pounding on the door. I grabbed the sage bundle and torched it with my lighter, then waved it all around the door frame. I don't know if the thing outside could smell it, but it walked off the porch all pissed off, growling, and went off into the night. This time, I ran to the window and tried to get a glimpse of it, but all I could see was a very dark, amorphous form disappearing into the trees. I think I've figured a lot of stuff out. I think this entity is mimicking me because it's going to try to convince Faye that it is me. It is rehearsing my voice and then whispering to Faye while she sleeps, talking to her in her dreams, trying to get her to let it inside of our house. I think it wants to convince her that I'm the imposter, not it. I think I also figured out why the voices go crazy at night, and why they're getting closer to my home. These fuckers aren't trying to scare me. They're trying to deprive me of sleep. If I am psychologically and emotionally drained, I'm weaker, I'm delirious, I'll make a mistake. Their or his attempts to get to me will be easier. I'm still trying to figure out how controlling Faye like a puppet in her sleep plays into all this. I know what I saw. There was a man standing outside our house, walking the exact same creepy way Faye was sleepwalking, at the exact same time. I'm also still considering the possibility that I already made a terrible mistake, and that the imposter has already won. When I went outside on the first night at the cabin with Faye, trying to see where the voices were coming from, I left the door unlocked. You or Anfranbut said that that was the moment that Faye was replaced by something else. I just don't know what to think. But for now, I'm going the fuck to sleep. Update for 30th. Well, I found the ring. Update 5 halves. 1 I'm out of the cabin and safe. Do not go to Pikes Peak, looking to be a hero, looking to find the mines, or looking for me. You will die. Avalanches, radon gas, mine collapses, etc. Do not be a fool. Edit. I took down the photo of Faye because someone started sending me creepy messages about it. I should have known better. Someone gilded another one of my posts. Thanks very much, stranger. There are so many new developments, it's hard to figure out how to cram it all into a 3,000-word nosleep post. The morning after I spoke with my fiancée and Faye on the satellite phone, and then was visited by the thing that mimics our voices. I got a call from Richard and Jason. In case you don't remember, they are my 2 best friends, and they're staying at my place and taking care of Faye while I'm gone. They're the only people I trust. Richard stays up very late and sleeps in the morning, kind of like what I'm doing now. He does this for 2 reasons: to work on his art commissions, and to make sure Faye doesn't stab everyone to death and burn the house down in her sleep. The guys report that she is behaving quite normally and feeling good or being productive during the day, but then at night, she is unpredictable and weird. I feel like her soul is being cleaved in half. The 2 distinct sets of behavior are drifting farther from each other every day. Around 1 a.m. that night, Richard heard the voice of a young child, mumbling incoherently. He is up to speed on all of the unusual experiences that have plagued my fiancée and me, so he immediately got up to investigate. He looked out the kitchen window, which faces the same part of the forest where I saw the man mimicking Faye's sleepwalking movements. Richard didn't find anything, so he walked a circle around the house and realized that the sound was coming from our bedroom window. He went inside and woke Jason up, and they stood outside the bedroom door, listening. They claimed they heard the distinct sounds of a child whispering and softly singing, and I bet you can guess which song. Oh soul, Miadu, I'm a naked soul, Miadu. The song Faye and 1 heard outside of the cabin on our second night, sung in a child's voice. Both of these dudes are super ripped climbing enthusiasts, and they said they had never been so creeped out in their entire lives. Jason knocked on the door and said, "Faye, who's in there?" And he promptly heard the child go, "Shh," and whisper something inaudible. Richard pushed the door open and said that Faye was standing in the corner of the room, in the dark, facing the wall. She was standing up on her toes, dragging her hands and nails down the wall and talking to herself with her back turned to the guys. She said, "Oh, their skin is so perfect. Which one? Which one? Put him down in the hole." Richard saw something out the window and hurried over to it. Jason stepped inside the room and reached out to put a hand on Faye's shoulder, but she whirled around quickly and covered her face with her hands. Her eyes were open, which is unusual for her when she sleepwalks. Then, and these are the exact words Jason used, she started speaking in the voice of a little kid. She made whining and crying sounds, and rocked back and forth on her feet, cradling her arms as though she held a child. Then she turned around and started scratching at the wall again, still whispering in the kid's voice, saying things like, "It's Faye, I can't see you. Are you up in the trees or down in the hole?" Then she started singing again. Richard ran down the stairs and out the front door, barreling toward the tree line. From the window, he had seen a small child, walking around on its tippy toes, flailing its arms up in the air. On the phone, he told me he could hear it singing while he watched it from the window. When Richard got about 20 yards away from the kid, it took off running on the balls of its feet, heading straight into the trees. Richard stayed in pursuit and went in after it. It was too dark for him to follow, and he lost the kid after a few moments. He wandered around for a few minutes, searching the area, and eventually heard the voice of an adult male. Rich says he walked a few steps deeper into the grove and saw a huge man standing about 30 feet away, completely naked, looking up into the trees. There were lacerations or dark pockmarks of some sort all over his body. Now, Richard is about 61, 210 pounds and bulky or muscular, and he said this dude was way bigger than him. He said the man was perfectly still for several seconds, but then started rolling his head around, cracking his neck loudly, and started making gurgling and mumbling sounds. I guess Rich was paralyzed with fear, because he claims he stood there for an entire minute or more before running like hell back to the house as he turned to get out of there. The man let out a long "Hello," and as he did, his voice transformed. It became my voice. Richard said that the thing in the woods called out with my voice several times as he fled, wailing, "Please help me," and "They're gonna kill me tonight." Jason says that he did not hear or see anything out the window, only Richard running back inside, ghost white with terror. He said Richard actually cried. While they talked in the living room, Faye sat at the top of the stairs, just watching, wide awake, with a little smile on her face. The next morning, they took her to her psychiatric appointment, the first she's ever had, and I will hopefully hear back on that soon. It kills me that I'm not there with her now. I'm still stuck at Pikes Peak. It's like this place doesn't want me to leave. The ranger station shut down the entire road network on the mountain because of the huge blizzard that rolled in, and there are avalanche warnings. My road out of here is completely iced over, and one part of it has a snow collapse or mini avalanche. Shut up. I'm from California, where God pays attention. I'm in contact with the ranger. His name is Greg, just like Faye's dad, so that's why I won't avoid referring him by name in these updates, and he assures me they're working on getting the roads cleared every time it stops snowing. I missed my flight, but thankfully they gave me a voucher, so now I just roll into the airport whenever I can. I have enough food to feed an army, and the electricity here is surprisingly reliable, so I'm warm. The whiff dips out for 5-10 hours at a time though. I'm working on Donkey Kong Country 2 and Secret of Mana on the SNES and writing about my experiences here in my spare time. I also slipped on the icy porch steps and fell on my side, so I've got an enormous bruise and it hurts like a bitch, but only when I breathe, so one got that going for me. Sweetro Semery asked me if the cabin had a basement, and I had never thought to check. Outside, under the snowpack, and halfway covered with old chopped wood, I found a little locked door. The key was in the kitchen cupboard, and it turns out there's a decent-sized cellar under the house. Down inside, I found a ton of creepy shit. There is a bundle of long, black hair, several dozen jars of some rotten, mutant-looking shit, and tons of old books from the 60s and 70s, and lots of porno magazines. There are also lots of sticks and yarn, all of the material necessary to make a dream catcher like the one hanging at the tree line behind the cabin. I didn't touch anything, one just noped straight out of there. I've been thinking about something that Waitamizum said to me the other day, which was, have you considered that it is not a dream catcher at all? And he's right. I'm not an expert on Native American symbology or artifacts. It just looks kind of like a dream catcher to me, so I've been calling it one all this time. Taiwi, the Pueblo friend of the ranger, didn't call it that. He just said to leave it alone. I'm wondering if that thing attracts the imposter. Instead of keeping it away, it could mark the house. I kind of want to move it for one night, to see what happens. After all, Taiwi blessed the entire cabin, so I feel quite safe. And I have a .357 Magnum in case leaves don't protect me. At about 9:30 am, there was a knock on the door. I grabbed the gun, suspecting another encounter with the imposter. It was lightly snowing and gloomy, so one figured the sun was blocked enough that the creature would be willing to come out of the woods. But then I heard familiar voices, talking cheerfully. I looked out the window, and to my total surprise, it was Taiwi and his son Nathan. These badass motherfuckers had hiked up from the ranger station in the snow to check on me. I let them in and they made me tea. I cannot tell you how happy I was to see them. Taiwi brought me his own dream catcher. It was one he made specifically for me, and he told me one should hang it beside the creepy one. It's very colorful and ornate. I could tell he spent a lot of time on it. It's even got two beautiful hawk feathers dangling off it, which Nathan says represent freedom and unboundedness. He reiterated the importance of finding the engagement ring Faye had lost, and blessed the house again. I tried to get them to stay longer, but they had to get back down the mountain before the storm picked up, and told me one should come with them. We all knew I wouldn't. If I left with them, I'd be leaving Greg's truck, and I'd never have found what I came back for. I said goodbye and Taiwi hugged me. I wish that guy was my grandpa. I took a nap after they left. I figured out how to sleep without being interrupted by the goddamn voices in the forest from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's pretty quiet outside, so I nap on and off, but something really bad happened this time. I woke up opening the bathroom window. I've never sleepwalked before in my entire life. Faye's been sleeping next to me for 5 years, and she says I don't move, I don't speak, I don't snore, I don't steal sheets. I'm the most polite bed buddy on earth. But when I came to, I was standing next to the toilet, both hands prying the frozen window open. It was about 2 inches up, and the freezing cold wind on my fingers is what woke me up. I slammed it shut and checked all the windows, ensuring that they were locked and sealed tight. Then went back to bed. I dragged one of the living room chairs into the bedroom with me and propped it against the door, so that I'd knock it over if I got up again. This did not work. At around 1 p.m., I woke up standing at the front door, and found myself pulling it open. The loud groans it issued were what snapped me out of my stupor. I slammed the door shut and looked out the window next to it, praying nothing was out there waiting for me at the tree line. I saw nothing. Then, I remembered that I'd had a dream. Images of a huge hole carved into mountains surfaced in my mind. Snow and branches were caked all around the mouth of the entrance, and an impossible, yawning blackness emanated from within. In the dream, I just kind of stood there, gazing into the vacant face of the deep, listening to Faye's weakened cries. I sat down on the couch and just sort of cried for about a half hour. I thought about what our lives had become, and how bad I missed her. I thought about all of the dreams we have of our future, the things that can never be if I don't figure out how to save her. I thought about all the promises I never keep if one die up here. I decided that it would be best to hang the dream catcher sooner rather than later, because the clouds broke for a while and it was fantastically bright out. I got geared up and trudged across the snow with Tai's gift, and hung it on a branch about 3 feet away from the evil-looking one. And that's when I saw it. Faye's engagement ring. It was dangling there right in front of me, as if to tease me. Someone had woven it into the strings of the dream catcher. Stood there for a long time, right between the two objects. I couldn't figure out if some benevolent force was giving me a break, or if I was being taunted by whatever beings have haunted my footsteps ever since I arrived on the mountain. Retrieving the ring would require me to not only touch, but destroy, the creepy dream catcher. I had the thought to go ask Nazleep what I should do, but I feared that if I left even for 1 second, the ring would be gone when I got back. So I just tried to solve the riddle by myself. How one wish I'd brought the satellite phone out there with me. After a few minutes of standing there, I reasoned that Tai's dreamcatcher would probably do just as well in protecting me, if in fact that was the function of the original one. I also figured that if it were cursed or something, touching it couldn't actually be worse than leaving the ring there and allowing Faye to be completely consumed by her madness. If the ring has anything to do with the creatures who are controlling Faye and me while we sleep, then getting it back is a priority over not touching weird stuff in the woods. So that's what I did. I broke the brittle thing apart and took my goddamn ring back. What else could I have done? And, as if on cue, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a person, standing in the snow beside a tree, about 20 feet from my left side. I was so scared I didn't look directly at him. I just watched him in my periphery and prayed he hadn't noticed me. It was a man with black and gray hair and dark clothes, facing away from me. His head was tilted all the way back, and he was looking way up at the tops of the trees. His limbs looked mangled and bent and elongated, even without looking right at him. I slid the ring into my pocket as slowly as I could, trying not to make a sound, and as I did the man hobbled around and faced me. One really didn't want to look now. I just slammed my eyes shut. I knew he was looking at me. I could feel his gaze on me. He started gurgling and making throaty noises, then said in a voice so threatening I can't even begin to describe, "Felix, I knew you woo, Felix. I knew you woo, Felix. I knew you over and over." Uck off running and screaming like a bat out of hell. I screamed all the way back to the fucking cabin. I barricaded the front door with the couch and burned up half the sage I had left. I even prayed. Like an actual prayer. I haven't done that since I was 15 years old. I'm really struggling to write this last part. It's taken me hours to finish this entry because I keep getting up to distract myself. The ranger isn't answering his phone, and nobody's at the station. Maybe the power is out. I don't know what I did by breaking that dream catcher, and I don't know what tonight is going to be like. But Faye, if you ever read this, and if something happens to me, don't forget your tenderness, your softened skin. All I needed your love is my tourniquet. I have to say this, even though I'll desperately want it not to be true. The man just saw was Taiwi. Here is the interview I have been promising for so long. As you can see by its length, there is no possible way I could have uploaded it at the cabin on the crappy Wi-Fi. Sorry about my allergies. Sorry that this is so long, but people have been hounding me for as much information as possible. This will be my last update. We need to rest. Things have spiraled out of control up here on the mountain. I made a decision that changed everything, and it almost killed me. Only time will tell if it was the right choice to make. But for now, I'm just piecing everything together in my mind, and trying to convince myself that I'm one step closer to solving all of this. I destroyed the strange dream catcher that has been dangling on a tree branch behind the cabin since Faye and I first came to this place. Nobody knows who made it, what its purpose is, or why it's on the side of the tree facing into the woods, rather than the side facing the house. I found all of the supplies to make another one just like it, locked behind a cellar door that someone tried to hide years ago. But when I broke the dream catcher, I learned everything I needed to know. Taiwi is dead. A lot of people have said otherwise, but I'm certain of this. I saw his likeness, stretched over the gruesome form of the thing that stalks these woods. It was broad daylight, and the look on that its mangled face told me exactly what I didn't want to accept. I really am all alone. Several Redditors have speculated that this thing only shows itself at night, and always faces away from me because it cannot convincingly appear human, not without the help of the recently dead. Taiwi confirmed this during his first visit to the cabin, but when I destroyed that dream catcher, there it was, proudly masquerading in the skin and hair of my best friend on this mountain, in the sunlight. No less. I cannot even imagine how his son Nathan must feel, if he's even alive. The two hiked back to the ranger station from the cabin, knowing a blizzard was coming. I'm sure that's when Taiwi died. When I got back inside the cabin, I completely lost it. I barricaded the door and windows with every piece of furniture I could, but there just isn't enough stuff inside this little cabin to protect me, so I sat there on the floor against the bed, clutching the gun, sort of wishing my dark visitor would come and kill me already. But of course, this is Pikes Peak. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to you here. So the mountain kept fucking with me. It was getting dark, and I was on the verge of a total psychological break. I've been running on 4 hours of sleep per night and a few naps for the past 2 weeks. My only hope for redemption just got turned into a puppet, and I was about to find out what happens come nightfall when the dreamcatcher no longer functions. So what did my brain decide was the best course of action at this point? To fall asleep. Somehow I nodded off. In fact, one think my brain just did a hard reset, because nothing about that sleep was restful. I just went into a fear coma the minute the sun dipped behind the mountain. And then I woke up. I was in bed, with the sheets pulled up over me. The lights were off, all of them, and my hands were empty, when before they held Greg's .357 Magnum. When I opened my eyes, I supposed it was possible that I'd climbed into bed myself. After all, I'd caught myself sleepwalking twice the day before, but it took me a solid minute before I realized there was a fucking arm wrapped around my chest. I did not have the reaction you'd expect. Most people would fly out of the bed screaming bloody murder, but the first thought I had was, where am I? My parents divorced when I was 3, so as a kid, I'd spend a few nights a week at my dad's house and a few nights at my mom's. Sometimes I'd wake up in the dark and not be sure which bedroom I was in. It always took me a second to remember where I was. This is the thought that crossed my delirious mind. Maybe I was back at home in California. Maybe I was at Faye's parents' house in Arvada? Sort of rolled out from under the arm, and tried to figure out who the hell was lying in bed with me. I'd been sleeping with the lights on for the past few nights, and I'd never in my right mind have turned them off after seeing the creature so close to me a few hours ago. The body in bed beside me felt familiar, its warmth, its texture. I was pretty sure it was Faye, but I still couldn't remember if she was really with me up here. Then she spoke. She reached through the dark and touched my face, and said, "What's wrong, Pop-Tart?" Yes, that's actually the nickname she gave me some s'mores Pop-Tarts. I wasn't really afraid. Just overwhelmed with confusion. I asked her where we were, and why the lights were off. She just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Honey, we're in Pikes Peak. There's a storm. The power's out. It's done this before. What's wrong with you?" I got up out of bed. A feeling of dread was falling over me, heavier and heavier, the more awake I became. As soon as the sheets were off of me, I felt a blistering cold, colder than it's ever been in the cabin. The heat must have been off for hours. Only a bit of pale moonlight filtered in through the windows, and it was barely enough to outline the objects in the room. I stumbled around looking for the flashlight, totally unable to remember where it was, and said, "Why the fuck is it so cold? Did you screw with the heat?" Faye tried to get me to come back to bed. She told me it went off and came back on earlier, and that it would probably be back on soon. Everything about her felt wrong, but her voice was perfectly clear. Her skin felt totally recognizable. I couldn't shake the strange feeling one had. I left the bedroom and walked out into the living room. It was even colder out there. I felt my way around with my hands and noticed a strong, icy draft coming from down the hall. It's a straight shot from the living room to the bathroom at the other end of the hall, and from where I stood, I could see the bathroom window. It was wide open. A big, 2-by-2-foot gap leading out to the snow. I went to shout, "What the fuck did you?" But Faye stepped out of the bedroom and stood in the hallway between me and the bathroom. She said something like, "Felix, you aren't feeling well. Do you not remember what's going on? You're sick." I almost believed her, because I definitely felt dizzy and feverish, but it could also have been the mixture of disturbed confusion and freezing cold. The thought that this was not really Faye invaded my mind, and one immediately regretted not knowing where the gun was. The only words I could find were, "Who are you? And why are you here?" Faye just stood there in the darkness of the hallway. The only thing I could see was a little silver outline of her figure. Her face was entirely black, but even though her eyes were hidden, I could feel them burning into me, just as Tyos had when I found the ring. It felt like we stood in the eye of a hurricane. Everything was totally calm, but I knew hell was about to break loose. There wasn't a single sound outside. No branches snapped, no snow crunched, no voices moaned. It was as if time had stopped completely. Faye didn't move, even as she spoke. She held herself with the stillness of death. She said, "Felix, it wasn't to get my attention. It wasn't to convince me she was really my fiancée. It was a threat. She was reminding me that she knew my name." I still don't fully understand what the power is in names, but Tywee and Nathan believed it, and many Redditors warned me about it. When she said my name, I felt smaller than her, even though I stand almost foot over her head. "Do you remember the 5? She asked. She still didn't move an inch. Not even her hair kicked up in the drafts that blew in from behind her. "I can't remember. Not in this place." I didn't know how to respond to this. I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could say was, "Get out. You are not welcome here." Again, Faye didn't move, but she did clear her throat, and the sound she made was about 2 octaves deeper than the real Faye's voice. She inhaled sharply and said, Tell me about the number 5. And that's when I knew. I remembered where I was, what day it was, and exactly what had happened up until this point. My visitor had finally come to call, and it no longer needed to be invited. I deeply regretted breaking that dream catcher. My hand instinctively slid over my pocket, and to my relief, the little shape of Faye's engagement ring pushed back against my fingers. There was nothing else to do. I decided to throw down the gauntlet. I figured it was probably time to die anyway, so I might as well go out bravely. I just said, "I know who you are, and you will never be Faye." She took a menacing step toward me. A gurgle seeped out of her throat. She inhaled again, more slowly this time, and demanded, "I want to know about the number 5. Tell me, Felix." I looked all around me on the counters for a weapon, but found nothing. The knife block was on the other side of the short wall that divided the living room from the kitchen. There was only a roll of paper towels within reach, but in retrospect, I was so amped with terror that I probably could have beaten her ass to death with it. "I don't have a clue what that number means," I said. "In fact, about 5,000 people online don't either. Albi knows. Only Faye knows." My visitor started shaking with rage. Her face was wreathed with impossible black. There was an endless abyss in it that stung my eyes. But then I realized something. This creature, whatever it is, has had access to Faye's mind for several hours every night. Maybe for many years. Maybe even since she first visited the cabin, when she was 5 years old. And in all that time, it still hadn't learned everything about her. It could never perfectly imitate her, because she kept some things buried so deep in her subconscious that not even this thing could find them. Whatever the number 5 meant to Faye, that deep place is where she kept the secret. She didn't even go there in her dreams. The next part was all a blur. I said something like, "You are the one who speaks to her in her sleep." The visitor kind of nodded. I said, "You ask her things, she answers you. I hear everything she says." The visitor didn't react. Then I said, "You've asked her this question just like you're asking me now. And she always says, 'No, I can't tell you.'" My visitor took another step forward, dragging a hand along the wall. As Faye had so many times in her sleepwalking fits, it raised up on the balls of its feet and twitched violently. It said to me, "Will make you tell me." It didn't try to mimic my fiancée's voice anymore. It sucked in huge breaths, trying to control its rage. There is a certain feeling you get when you're about to die. When you're in danger, and you might die. Fear completely overwhelms your senses and compels you to flee, to fight, to save yourself. Somehow. But past that point, when you know you are going to die, that fear becomes useless and disappears. This has happened to me only once before, when I was sucked into a riptide at the beach during an El Nino winter as a teenager. In that moment, I just wondered, will my body ever come back to shore? Will they ever know what happened to me? In this moment, my heart slowed down, and I didn't feel cold anymore. I just stood there, ready to be mauled to death. I was satisfied in the knowledge that I had not given this creature what it wanted, and therefore blocked it from using that knowledge as a weapon against Faye. Whatever 5 meant, this thing needed it to take full possession of my fiancée, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I laughed. I actually laughed, and said, "Well, you're shit out of luck, buddy. Because I don't know what the hell it means. Maybe you can tell me when you figure it out." The imposter laughed right back, in my voice, a perfect mimicry. Then it said, "Well, then we don't need you anymore." It lunged at me. I have dodged a rabid German shepherd like I was a ninja, but this thing was so fast and so strong it knocked the wind clean out of me. I toppled backward and crash-landed on my shoulders on the tiles near the front door. It unleashed a barrage of blows on my face and neck. It raked my sweatshirt with razor-like claws. I tried my best to defend myself, but it was so dark in the house I couldn't see almost anything. I managed to flail my way free of its grasp for just a second. I pulled myself up to my feet by grabbing the counter, and in doing so, my hand brushed against the little bundle of sage I'd been burning. The imposter was on me like lightning, grabbing me by the back of the neck and pulling me with the strength of a 250-pound man. I very ingloriously whirled around and smashed the sage bundle into the creature's face, burnt it first, and wrapped my other arm round its head. Faye's familiar locks tangled in my fingers. I pulled its head forward and jammed the brittle sage into its eyes as hard as I could. Screaming like a banshee, it shrieked and growled in some inhuman language, and tried to push me away, but I held on as hard as I could, and kept driving my fingers into its eyes, crushing the twigs in them. A memory of Nathan and Tywa's chant surfaced in my mind, and I shouted the only part of it I could pronounce. Tinnik Aiden. Tinnik Aiden. Tinnik Aiden. Who knows if I'm even remotely close to the correct spelling? My hand slid over its face, and the mockery of Faye's appearance fell away. I couldn't see in the dark, but the face no longer resembled my fiancée's. The mouth was much too big for a human's and the wet lips draped across the maw of 100 fangs. And that was it. The bastard had had enough. It screamed and growled, and took off on all fours. Its limbs elongated as it moved farther from me. Its shape became recognizably inhuman, even in the pale light. It barreled up the bathroom wall and out the window, and in moments, it was completely gone. I definitely am not afraid to cry, do it at funerals, at weddings, during the Hunchback of Notre Dame, etc., but I'm a little embarrassed to admit how long and hard I cried after that creature left the cabin. I had never felt so utterly, miserably alone in my entire life. I only stopped when the power came back on, probably 20 minutes later. The heater kicked on instantly, and one ran over to shut and lock the bathroom window. My satellite phone was gone. The gun was gone, probably outside in the snow, or up in a tree, or down in the hole. I peeked out the kitchen window and saw something lying on the porch, right near the front door. When one cracked the door open just for a second, I saw that it was Tywa's dreamcatcher. It had been destroyed and placed in front of the cabin, mocking me, or reminding me that one was unprotected. I checked the timer on the little battery clock in the kitchen, and it read 12:15 a.m. Forsaken cabin, but I vowed to myself that at daybreak, no matter the conditions, I would take Greg's truck and get down the mountain, or die trying. I didn't care if I slid off the cliff face. I'd never watch the sun go down in Colorado ever again. For a while, I actually considered leaving. Right then, in the middle of the night. Many Redditors have reprimanded me for not doing this before, but I assure you, even in this situation, driving in the dark on that icy little road next to the 400-foot cliff is a complete nope situation. But the mountain had other plans for me. At one point, I risked sneaking outside to determine how deep the truck was buried, but as I approached, I saw that the snow had been dug out around the two front tires, and they'd been slashed to ribbons. All I could do was let out a grim laugh and trudge back inside. At least it was warm in there now. At around 1 a.m., the voices started up. They arose from far off in the woods, several of them at once, groaning and screaming dark elegies to the night. It was all the same evil gibberish I'd heard 1,000 times before, but they slowly made their way into the open field, and eventually, to just outside the cabin. Lit the remaining pieces of sage and did a once-over on all the windows that weren't barricaded with furniture. I also donned the medicine pouches and amulet that Tywa and Nathan had given to me, hoping they'd be similarly effective in protecting me. Then I remembered Tywa's useless dreamcatcher, and imagined my crumpled corpse lying in the snow beside it.